Welcome back. We are working through the World of Warcraft Chronicles Volume 1. And now we are at the War of the Shifting Sands. This was a very big event in World of Warcraft. I mean, when we experienced it, the quest line that we did was much, much later in the storyline, obviously. But having to do with Encourage and the Scarab Gong and putting together the Scepter of the Shifting Sands was a very big deal. So let's learn all about it. The War of the Shifting Sands, 975 years before the Dark Portal. Since the last war against the Troll Empire, the descendants of the Akir had stayed hidden in their subterranean domains. Only the Mantid of Pandaria remained an active threat. Nearly all of Azeroth's races had forgotten the ruthless potential of the insectoid colonies that lurked beneath the earth. One of these colonies, the Kiraji, had taken root in the ancient fortress of Ankh-Kiraj. The Keepers had originally built the enormous stronghold to imprison the old god Cthulhu. There, within Ankh-Kiraj's lifeless sandstone corridors, the insectoids had lain dormant. Though Azshara and her Night Elf Empire had once known of the fortress, its existence had become lost to time. Few living creatures dwelled near Ankh-Kiraj. This was due in part to the vast and inhospitable desert of Silithus, which stretched out from the stronghold's towering obelisks. Ankh-Kiraj wasn't rediscovered by the elves until Archdruid Fandral Staghelm initiated a quest to regrow the land of Silithus. He dispatched his warrior son, Valston, and a group of his most trusted druids to perform this task. They trudged across the scalding dunes, searching for hidden water reservoirs that they could use to transform the region into a lush forest. Valston and his comrades eventually stumbled across Ankh-Kiraj. Although some of the druids cautioned against entering the fortress, Fandral's son forged ahead. His presence in the cold, dead halls inadvertently roused the dormant Kiraji back to life. From its prison beneath Ankh-Kiraj, Cthulhu also became aware of the awakened Kiraji. The old god drove the insectoids into a murderous frenzy. The highest castes of Kiraji society began organizing their lesser minions, the most numerous of which were known as the Silithid. These vicious insectoids came in many forms, and all obeyed the will of their Kiraji overlords. The discovery of the Kiraji shocked Valston and his druid companions. Upon retreating from Ankh-Kiraj, they established a small outpost in Silithus to keep watch over the insectoids. Before their eyes, the fortress swelled with greater and greater numbers of Kiraji. Then, without warning, a massive army spilled forth from the tunnels beneath Ankh-Kiraj. At the head of this swarming host were the Kiraji. They directed their Silithid minions to engulf the surrounding deserts and spread into other regions as well. By this time, Valston had called for help from his father. Fandral rallied a force of druids, sentinels, priestesses, and keepers of the grove to deal with the Kiraji threat. In the southern reaches of Kalimdor, the Night Elf host clashed with their vicious foes. At times, they managed to drive the Kiraji back towards the dunes of Silithus, only for the insectoids to mount a counterattack and regain the advantage. This ebb and flow continued for many months, leaving in its wake the broken corpses of elves and insectoids alike. The War of the Shifting Sands had begun. Fandral and his comrades established outposts across southern Kalimdor as they prosecuted their war. From these locations, they continued their brutal fight against the Kiraji. Eventually, the tireless druids and their allies managed to push the Kiraji back into the heart of Silithus itself. Yet just as victory seemed within reach, the war took a dire turn. during a feint orchestrated by the Karaji, Valstan was captured and ripped apart before Fandrel's eyes. Valstan's death shattered the Archdruid and sowed uncertainty throughout the Night Elves' ranks. The Karaji seized the opportunity and swarmed out of Silithus once again, pushing into the eastern deserts of Teneris. In their fervor, they assaulted the sanctum of the Bronze Dragonflight, the Caverns of Time. The Karaji's reckless attacks spurred the Bronze Flight into action. Led by Anachronos, they enlisted the help of the red, green, and blue dragonflights. The mighty dragons joined the Night Elves and helped drive the Karaji armies back behind the walls of Ahn'Qiraj. But even with the mighty dragons joining the war, the Karaji were too numerous to vanquish entirely. Fandrel feared that the war would never end. Thousands of elves had already perished at the claws of the insectoids, and he was loath to sacrifice more of his people. Ultimately, he and the dragons devised a means to end the war immediately. They would lock the insectoids inside Ahn'Qiraj itself. The Night Elves and dragons gathered before Ahn'Qiraj to complete this task. Fandrel called on his druids to focus their powers as one. Along with Anachronos, the elves summoned a great barricade to close off Ahn'Qiraj. Outside the cursed city, the dry earth split wide, and a magical barrier of stone and colossal roots emerged. This impenetrable scarab wall towered high over the barren landscape, effectively sealing the Karaji within their city forever. Sorry, I had to blow my nose. As a final act, Anachronos forged two mystical artifacts, the Scarab Gong and the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. The dragon entrusted the scepter to Fandrel. Should the need ever arise to enter Ahn'Qiraj again, he could use this artifact to open the Scarab Wall. Fandrel found no solace in ending the Karaji threat, for Valstan's death still tormented his heart. In his rage, he shattered the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, and the pieces became lost for the next 1,000 years. That's why you have to do a quest to put it all together again. And this was the moment in Fandrel's life where he started going down a dark path. He was very impetuous before, but after his son was killed in front of his eyes, he was never the same again. The Guardian Aegwynn, 823 years before the Dark Portal. As the years passed in Dalaran, new guardians of Tirisfal came and went. Some retired in peace, others fell during their tireless war against the Burning Legion's agents. Nevertheless, Dalaran remained safe under the Guardian's watchful eye. One of the last Guardians to serve was a brilliant magus named Scavel. At the end of his century of commitment, he found no suitable candidate to take his place. The Council of Tirisfal worried about what could happen in the years or decades it might take to find another Guardian, and they requested that Scavel remain in his position. The human mage was reluctant, but he ultimately agreed. After all, the century of service was only a tradition, not a law. The relationship between Scavel and the Council was relatively strong. Together they continued to protect the world from the Legion's predations. Years passed before Scavel finally found a group of apprentices who might succeed him. Among them was a human woman named Aegwynn, who quickly distinguished herself as the most skilled and dedicated of the prospects. The Council of Tirisfal eventually bestowed the honor of guardianship upon her with Scavel's blessing. She immediately began banishing the forces of darkness. Aegwyn was a brilliant guardian, but she was also stubborn and bullheaded in her relations with the Council of Tirisfal. Her deep-seated mistrust of authority figures often put her at odds with the elder Magi. Ignoring their recommendations and advice, Aegwyn forged her own path during her long years as guardian. Yet the Council of Tirisfal was not troubled by her demeanor. The Magi knew that Aegwyn was a sorceress without equal, a prodigy capable of wielding massive amounts of arcane energy. Her effectiveness as guardian outweighed her unpredictability and penchant for disobedience. Near the end of her century of stewardship, Aegwyn sensed something dark stirring in the icy lands of Northrend. She traveled to the distant continent and discovered a pack of demons that were hunting errant blue dragons, feeding on their potent arcane energies. Although mighty, the dragons could not withstand the Legion's cunning and power. Aegwyn immediately journeyed to the Tower of Wormrest Temple, the hallowed shrine of all dragons. She called on the majestic creatures to make good on their sacred pact to protect the world from evil. Led by Alexstrasza the Lifebinder, several of the dragonflights agreed to fight at the Guardian's side. Together they staged an ambush near the gigantic skeletal remains of Galacrond. I've got a picture, if I can find it. There it is. The demons fell into Aegwyn's trap. As a blizzard tore over the terrain, the Guardian and her winged allies overwhelmed the Legion's minions. Yet neither Aegwyn nor the dragons expected what came next. The skies of Northrend churned and darkened. A monstrous demonic form emerged upon the battlefield. Sargeras, ruler of the Burning Legion. This was only an avatar of the Demon Lord, a tiny portion of Sargeras' vast cosmic power, yet he nonetheless radiated great strength and fury. He unleashed his terrible might on Aegwyn, intending to destroy the Guardian who had thwarted his agents for so long. Aegwyn did not hesitate to fight back. She summoned her powers and brought them to bear against Sargeras. The battle that followed was the most difficult Aegwyn had ever fought. In the shadow of Galacron's gargantuan remains, Sargeras and the Guardian called down the fury of the heavens. Their attacks tore the darkened skies asunder and scarred the icy crust of Northrend. A storm of magic engulfed the region and held even the mighty dragons at bay. With a final, relentless flurry of spellwork, Aegwyn defeated her foe. Though drained from the effort, she was victorious. Or so it seemed. When Aegwyn had struck Sargeras down, he had transferred his spirit into her weakened body. There, a sliver of Sargeras' undying malevolence would remain lurking within the depths of her soul. Unaware of the dark presence hidden deep within her, Aegwyn gathered Sargeras' colossal broken form to seal it away where it could harm no one else. She considered many locations to serve as the Demon Lord's final resting place. In the end, she chose the ancient night elven city of Suramar, some of which had been blasted to the bottom of the sea during the Sundering. During the War of the Ancients, the Legion had attempted to open a gateway within Suramar itself. This plan was foiled by a sect of Highborn led by Grand Magistrix Elisande. These powerful sorcerers created a series of enchanted seals to close the demon's portal and also negate nearby fell energies. When the Sundering later tore through the world, the part of Suramar containing the Legion's failed gateway was sucked beneath the waves. It was these lost ruins that drew Aegwyn's attention. Knowing that the Highborn seals would nullify whatever evil still lingered in Sargeras' avatar, she buried the Demon Lord's broken body within the sunken portion of Suramar. Aegwyn hoped Sargeras' remains would lie undisturbed until the end of time. Not a good chance of that happening. Liu Lang and the Wandering Isle, 800 years before the Dark Portal. While Guardian Aeduan kept watch over the world of Azeroth, the lonely Pandaren continued their isolated existence. Life on their homeland of Pandaria progressed in relative peace, save for the Mantid's periodic assaults against the Serpent's shrine. Against the Serpent's spine. As a people, the Pandaren were content to live out their days behind the thick mists that shrouded their domain. They all believed that the rest of Azeroth had been annihilated in the terrible sundering. But a young Pandaren, Liu Lang, did not share this belief. He had been raised on a small ranch in the tranquil Valley of the Four Winds. He often wandered the cliffs that overlooked the sea, wondering if anything existed beyond the horizon. His curiosity led him to make a bold proclamation. He would embark on a great sea voyage and discover, once and for all, what had become of the outside world. Ignoring the warnings and ridicule of his fellow Pandaren, Liu Lang gathered a few meager supplies and began his journey. Atop a small turtle named Shen Zin Su, he sailed through the cloaking mists. Time passed without word from Liu Lang, and the other Pandaren believed he must have died on his foolhardy venture. Then, 5 years later, Liu Lang returned. He told incredible tales of mysterious lands and peoples on the other side of the sea. After gathering more supplies, Liu Lang set out once again. This time he would not endure his journey alone. Shen Zin Su had grown larger over the years, and Liu Lang's stories had inspired one Pandaren to join him on the next leg of his voyage. Her name was Shinizi, and she later became Liu Lang's wife. Every 5 years Liu Lang returned. Each time, Shenzin Su had become larger, and more Pandaren decided to join the eccentric explorer for a life of adventure. This tradition continued for decades until the great turtle had grown to the size of a giant island. Misty mountains and lakes formed atop the turtle's shell. In time, villages sprang up across the landscape. These became home to a thriving community of Pandaren who would eventually name their unique refuge the Wandering Isle. On his final voyage from Pandaria, the elderly Liu Lang fell into a deep sleep from which he never awoke. In death, his spirit merged with the sea turtle himself. Liu Lang's tradition of bold exploration and daring to dream beyond the known did not die with him. The Pandaren of the Wandering Isle would carry on his values for many centuries to come. All right, we'll take a break there because I can't talk anymore. And thank you for listening.